The storm had come out of nowhere. One moment, the sky was clear. The road ahead stretched without trouble. And then, within minutes, dark clouds had swallowed the sun. The wind howled through the trees like some unseen force, whispering warnings I couldn't understand. Rain pelted against my windshield so hard I could barely see. My GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the eerie glow of my headlights cutting through the misty darkness. I had been driving alone for hours, making my way to a small town where my uncle lived. He had fallen sick recently, and since I had no real family left, it felt like the right thing to be there for him. But now, stuck in this relentless storm, I was beginning to regret not waiting for better weather. The highway had been empty for miles, and I hadn't seen a single sign of life in what felt like forever. Then, as if the universe had heard my desperation, something flickered in the distance. At first, I thought it was a trick of the rain, the way lightning illuminated the landscape in short bursts. But no, there it was. A dim golden glow breaking through the thick curtain of rain. Houses, an entire village. That made no sense. I had studied the map before leaving, and I was sure there was nothing out here except endless stretches of forest and old abandoned farmland. But there it was, right in front of me. I didn't have much of a choice. Driving blind in this storm wasn't an option. And if the village was real, if it had people, maybe I could find shelter for the night. I turned off the main road, following a narrow dirt path that led toward the lights. As I got closer, my skin prickled with something I couldn't quite name. The village looked wrong, not run down or abandoned, but out of place. The houses were old, their architecture unfamiliar, almost as if they had been built centuries ago and never touched by time. The streets were silent, no cars, no signs of movement, only the occasional flicker of lanterns swaying in the wind. I parked near what looked like a small inn, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't right, that I should turn around, get back on the road, and keep driving no matter how bad the storm got. But logic won over fear. If I stayed in my car, I could freeze to death, or worse, skid off the road into a ditch. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, but the air was thick with moisture, carrying a scent that reminded me of damp wood and something older. The streets were lined with cobblestones, uneven beneath my feet. As I walked further in, I noticed something even stranger. The buildings had no signs, no markings, nothing to indicate stores or businesses. Just homes, perfectly preserved, as if waiting for their owners to return. Hello? My voice felt too loud in the suffocating silence. No answer. I tried again, stepping closer to one of the houses. The windows were dark, but I could feel something or someone watching me. It was an overwhelming sensation, crawling over my skin, like invisible fingers brushing against my neck. I turned in slow circles, scanning the empty street. Then, from the corner of my eye, movement, a shadow slipping between the houses. My breath caught in my throat. It hadn't been human. The way it moved was unnatural, gliding more than walking. My gut screamed at me to leave, to get back in my car and pretend I had never seen this place. But the storm raged on, and the village stood before me, waiting. And so, I stepped forward. The air felt heavier the moment I stepped deeper into the village. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way everything seemed. untouched. The houses, the lanterns, the cobblestone streets, they looked old, but not abandoned. As if the village had been waiting, frozen in time, for someone to walk in. For me. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the quiet. The rain had become a light drizzle, but the storm clouds loomed overhead, pressing down like an unseen weight. The lanterns lining the street flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the wet ground. Something about the way they swayed didn't feel right. There was no wind, and yet they moved, as if responding to something unseen. I passed by the first row of houses, glancing into the windows. Dark, empty. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something, was inside, watching me from behind the thick curtains. My heart pounded harder when I noticed the doors. Every single one of them was slightly open. Not wide, just a crack, as if left that way on purpose. Inviting. A deep sense of unease settled in my gut, but I forced myself to move forward. I needed shelter, somewhere to wait out the storm. The inn I had seen earlier seemed like the best option. Its wooden sign hung lopsided over the entrance. The carved letters faded with age. I reached for the door, expecting resistance, but it swung open easily, almost too easily, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something faint, metallic, the kind of smell that lingered in places untouched for years. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern on the counter, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Dust hung in the air, swirling in the faint glow. Yet, despite the signs of abandonment, the fireplace was burning. I hesitated. The flames crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. Someone had to be here. Someone had to have lit it, but the room was empty. "Hello?" My voice barely carried in the heavy silence. No response. I stepped further in, my boots creaking against the wooden floor. There was a guest book on the counter, the pages yellowed with age. I ran my fingers over it, hesitating before flipping it open. The ink on the pages had faded, but I could still make out names. The dates beside them sent a chill through me. Every entry, the same year. I took a shaky step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. That wasn't possible. It had to be a mistake, a joke. But the longer I stared at the names, the more a terrible realization crept into my mind. If this place had been abandoned for over a century, how was the fire still burning? A sudden creak from the floor above made my breath hitch. Someone was here. Or something. I turned toward the staircase, my body rigid with fear. The steps were covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed. Except for one set of footprints leading up, fresh. They hadn't been there a moment ago. A whisper drifted down from the upper floor, soft, almost musical. My skin crawled. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. The sound was melodic, yet wrong, like words spoken backward. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get out of this place, but my legs wouldn't move. The lantern on the counter flickered violently, the flame twisting unnaturally, stretching upward as if reaching for something unseen. And then, just as suddenly, it went out. Darkness swallowed the room. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. The only light left was the faint, dying glow of the embers in the fireplace. And in that dim, flickering light, I saw it. A shadow, standing at the top of the stairs, motionless, watching me. The figure at the top of the stairs didn't move. It stood perfectly still, its form blending into the shadows, except for the faint outline of its body. against the dim glow of the dying embers. My breath caught in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. The air in the room had shifted, thick, suffocating, pressing down on me like an unseen force. Then it moved, not like a person, not like anything human. It didn't walk. It glided, its shape stretching and shifting as if it were made of the darkness itself. The whispering sound from before grew louder, filling the space around me, seeping into my bones. The words were still unrecognizable, but they carried something else now. Anger. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the lantern on the counter. My shaking fingers found the edge of it, but there was no use. The flame was gone. My only source of light had abandoned me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as the figure took another step forward. And then it spoke. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was wrong, distorted, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. It echoed through the room, sending a chill down my spine. My mouth was dry, my legs weak, but I forced myself to respond. I just need shelter," I stammered. "I didn't mean to—" A sharp, ear-piercing shriek cut me off. The lanterns outside flickered violently, casting wild shadows against the walls. The entire building seemed to tremble, the wooden floor beneath me groaning as if it were alive. And then the shadow lunged. A cold force slammed into my chest, knocking me backward. I hit the ground hard, my head smacking against the wooden floor. Pain shot through my skull, but there was no time to process it. The air around me was suffocating, thick with something unnatural, something hungry. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and bolted for the door, my fingers barely wrapped around the handle when an unseen force yanked me backward. I crashed into a table, sending old dust-covered plates and books flying. The whispering voices were everywhere now, hissing in my ears, slipping into my mind like poisonous tendrils. Run. I had to run. Ignoring the pain searing through my body, I pushed myself up and sprinted toward the exit. The door, which had opened so easily before, now refused to budge. My hands fumbled at the handle, desperate. But it was as if someone, was holding it shut from the other side. A low, guttural sound came from behind me. Not human, not animal, something worse. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was no longer at the top of the stairs. It was right behind me, inches away. For the first time I saw it clearly. It wasn't just a shadow. It had a face, twisted, hollow, like a person who had been drained of everything human. Its mouth was stretched too wide, its eyes empty pits of darkness. I did the only thing I could. I screamed, and then the storm outside roared back to life. A deafening crack of thunder shook the building, and suddenly the door flew open on its own. The force was so strong that it nearly ripped off its hinges. Without thinking, I ran. The moment I crossed the threshold, the cold air of the storm hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran blindly through the village, my feet slipping on the wet cobblestone. The houses around me blurred as I moved, their windows dark and lifeless. But I could feel it, feel them, watching, waiting. The whispers hadn't stopped. They followed me, echoing through the streets, weaving through the rain. The village itself felt like it was shifting, changing, closing in around me. The path I had taken earlier was gone. In its place, endless rows of houses stretched in every direction, twisting and warping under the storm's fury. I was trapped. I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The village was shifting around me, twisting like a living maze, the streets no longer leading where they should. Every turn brought me back to the same place, the center of the village where a single ancient well stood. The storm raged overhead, the wind howling through the empty streets. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the village in bursts of eerie white light. And in those flashes, I saw them. Shadows, dozens of them, standing in doorways peering from behind windows, their hollow eyes fixed on me. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices layered and inhuman, merging into something that wasn't quite sound, but more like a force pressing into my skull. I stumbled forward, my legs weak, my mind unraveling. Then I saw it. At the edge of the village, where the road should have led back to the forest, there was something new, something that hadn't been there before. A wooden sign, half rotted and covered in moss. The writing on it was barely legible, but I could still make out the words. To leave, you must remember. Remember what? My mind raced. The village, the storm, the shifting streets. It all felt unreal, like a dream I had stumbled into. But the fear, the pain, the cold, they were real. I was here. But why? The figures were closing in now, moving toward me in slow, deliberate steps. The air around them warped, crackling with something unnatural. The shadows stretched, merging with the darkness pooling around my feet. I turned back to the well. Something about it felt familiar. I didn't know why, but I ran to it, my hands gripping the damp, moss-covered stones. The whispers turned into a wail, a desperate, angry cry that shook the ground beneath me. I peered over the edge. The water inside was impossibly still, black as ink, reflecting nothing. And then, in the depths, something moved. A face. My face. But it wasn't just a reflection. It was me, drenched, terrified, staring back with wide, desperate eyes. And behind me, in the reflection, I saw everything. The truth. This wasn't the first time I had been here. Memories crashed into me like a flood, drowning me in their weight. I had been here before, trapped in this cursed village, running in circles, chased by the same faceless horrors. Again and again, I had tried to escape, only to be dragged back. Because I had forgotten. The village didn't just appear in storms. It appeared to those who had lost something, to those who had forgotten themselves. It fed on the lost, trapping them in an endless cycle of fear and despair. And I was its prisoner. But now I remembered. A shudder ran through the ground, the whispers turning into panicked shrieks. The shadows recoiled, their forms flickering, distorting. The village itself seemed to tremble. I didn't hesitate. With a deep breath, I reached into the well, plunging my hands into the freezing water. Pain lanced through my body, but I didn't let go. The reflection warped, twisting violently, then shattered like glass. The world around me exploded in light. The storm vanished. The village disappeared. I gasped, my body collapsing onto solid ground. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the village. I was in the forest, the very place where I had first seen the strange lights through the rain. The storm was gone. The night was calm. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I was free. But as I stood up, something made my blood run cold. In the distance, beyond the trees, I saw it. The village, still there, waiting, hidden in the shadows of the night, and in the darkness I could feel them watching, waiting for the next lost soul to wander in.